We are recording. Let me share. Before I start, are there any questions? Let me share my screen. Are there any questions specifically before we get started? Here's the agenda of what we're going to look at. If there are no questions, I will just hop right into going down this list and taking a look at what we need to do for each of these 5 different things here. And they're all related. I mean, this is sort of the step-by-step of building and validating website content. So, how many of you guys are using or have downloaded and are using brackets? Is everybody using brackets? There is an alternate program called Komodo Edit, and I know some of the tutorial videos are illustrating use of Komodo Edit. They're essentially the same. Brackets and Komodo Edit are basic text editors with some control for built-in templates and control for web design, for HTML and for CSS and some other web programming languages. So it doesn't really matter which one you use. I like brackets better. It doesn't make a big difference, but I use brackets for the most part for everything. So brackets is basically this, and you can tell it to split screen. If I want to view 2 files side by side, this is very useful if I'm looking at an HTML page and a CSS page at the same time. But basically what I want to do, and some of you may have done this already, but I hopefully can get sort of start at the very beginning. I'm going to create a new file in brackets, and I'm going to go back to Firefox or Chrome. Now, in this read first assignment notes, there's some skeleton code, which I'm just going to copy and paste. You can feel free to use this. So you copy this, paste this into brackets. So you can see when I paste something into brackets, it comes in as just plain white text. It doesn't really recognize that this is a web file until I actually do a save as. So I save as, and I name it something. And what I have to do, what I want to do is I'm just going to put this on my desktop. I'm going to create a new folder, call it web root. And then this I'm going to call test.html. Now you have to include the .html. If you don't include the extension, it doesn't know what file type it is. So I'm including that .html, and then I'm hitting save. And what happens is, now that it knows this is an HTML file, it color codes this stuff. So it can tell me, I can see a little more clearly what I'm working with. I've got HTML elements here. I've got in green, I've got the attributes. In orange, I've got the attribute values. And in white, I've got just the content itself. So I've got some text in here. I've got a header. I've got a nav element. I've got a main element. I've got a footer element. And then I got a div called with an ID of wrapper that contains all of that stuff. And then there's body around all that. And that's all my content. And then above that I have head, which contains a meta tag to tell it the character set, and a title, which is something I might customize to call it something like that. So my demo page. So I would save it. Now I have something in my brackets called beautify, and what that does is it basically indents things. If you want to add stuff to brackets, you can. And you know, if you have it on your computer and pull it up, you can follow along. Like, if you go to the extension manager under File, Extension Manager allows you to put in some cool stuff. There's templates, and there's what's called beautify. Let me just do something. Maybe. There we go. So I forget which. Here it is. Look, I think it's this one, Travis Alman. If you just search for HTML templates, you can find this one here by Travis Almond, and then you can click install, and then it'll allow you. And then what it'll do is it'll actually give you HTML templates here in the menu. So I can create a new file. I can go edit HTML templates. I can tell it I want an HTML5 template, and it gives me the very basic template. Now what I've given you in that skeleton code is more than just basic. That includes a header, a nav section for menu, a main section for main content. Alright, so there's my test.html. So back to looking at brackets here. If I create a new file and I go to, now I have HTML templates, I can run and select HTML5. It gives me this. When I go to save it, I can call it test2, put it in web root. By the way, I would recommend creating a root folder for your website files, just to keep them organized and work with understanding your file structure. Okay, so I saved this, and now here's from the template. The other cool thing that I can do with in the extension manager, I can put in what's called beautify. And that's this one, beautified Drew Hamlet's thing. If you install that, and mine's already installed, which is why it says here. If you install beautify, that's what does the tabbing. It tabs everything and like spaces it over, and then save that. There we go. So what I have turned on is beautify on save. So every time I save this, it does this beautify thing. So that's the basics of using brackets. I mean, really, it's not any more complicated than that. The next step would be to put in your HTML code. So you would maybe do an H1. In my H1, you could put nav in here. I would use a UL. Something like that. I'm just going to do 3 here. And all I'm doing is just making links to other pages. These pages don't exist, but the idea being I will create a page called index.html, I will create a page called portfolio, resume. And to make it realistic testing, test.html is the page that I'm actually working on. So I save this and it beautifies. Is this making sense so far? So then main content, this would be like my main content area where I put everything between my header and nav and my footer. So footer would be where I would do like the copyright symbol 2016. You guys know how to do an email address, right? And you can tell something's wrong in here. It's pretty slick because it's smart enough to know when I make a mistake. Now it's fixed. When I left off a quote. So there I've put in this is the code for copyright symbol. So copy, right, 2016, and then this is an email link to my email address. So this is my basic page, and I mean obviously yours will have different stuff on it, but as far as the structure goes, it will probably be very similar, and I would say you could even use this skeleton code for just about any page you ever build, because most website pages have a header of some sort. Pretty much all website pages have a nav, a menu. They all have a main content section. Most web pages have a footer, and then most of them have this wrapper, which is used to sort of constrain the page content instead of letting it just flow wherever it wants to flow. So I've got that. I'm going to close test 2 because I don't need that. I can switch this here to no split if I wanted. But I like vertical split because I want to put a CSS page here eventually. So looking at our agenda here, so that is creating an HTML file in brackets. So I want to look next at uploading via Cyberduck. Now Cyberduck again is another optional application you can use. There's one called, the other one that's demonstrated, if I remember, it's FileZilla, right? But Cyberduck or FileZilla, either one, basically it's the same thing as like using brackets versus Komodo edit. They both do the same thing. I'm looking for... Alright, so you should have... Did everybody get an email from Information Analytics with a username and a password and a web host? If you did not, let me know. I have all that information I can forward on to you. So I'm going to go ahead and use someone who's not here as an example. Let's see, who do we have? So, you got one, good. Alright, we're going to go ahead and use Zandra's since there's it right at the top. So, your email address, your username should be the first part of your server. So the username is part of your server name. Your full domain is your server name, which is your username.jomc-class.org. So that's what you would, when you click Open Connection up here in Cyberduck, it drops this window down, and that's what you put in for the server. That's your domain. Everyone's going to have a little bit different, and it's, I mean, different in that it's based on your username. So then you put in your username and then this randomly generated string of characters for the password. And you can add to keychain. If you're on a Mac, it'll save your password for you. And then click connect. So what that gives you, yes, what that gives you is a www folder. And you all have that. What that is your web folder. That is the public folder that anyone who knows what your URL is can locate. So if I go to, oops, where is it? czandra.jomc-class.org. There is a page there. There's not much on it, but it has basically that. So you can all, I mean, you can go to your own. You can go to, you know, your first initial last name .jomc-class.org, and you should be able to, you should see this. Well, it should have your domain on it, but that is yours. So once you've logged in, you can double click into the www folder, and there's an index file in there already. That is your home page. That's what contains this. If I look at this, basically that's all it is. It's just a short HTML document. You can remove it if I delete it or rename it. Then nothing shows up. Because the index is what the browser looks for. If you don't have an index page, the browser is not going to find your home page. So that's one thing to note. Let me see here. Looks like we've got someone else in here. Okay. So once you're in here, once I've got a file that I want to upload, so say that file that I created right here, this test.html, I'm finished with it, I want to upload it. There are two things I want to do before I do that. The first thing is, obviously, I want to check it. So I want to create a new tab in my browser, I want to open file, I want to find that folder, I want to find test.html, and I want to open it. So this is what it looks like. It's very basic, but you can see there's my H1, there's my home, portfolio, resume, my links, and then there's my main content text, here's my footer text. So the copyright 2016, here's my email link. So that looks good. So then I want to upload that. And the upload process is really simple too. Once I'm connected to my, once I've connected to my host and I've double clicked into that www folder, it's just simply a matter of going to the Finder or going to your folder, going to find that, where is it? There it is, web root. So there's my web root folder. There's my test.html. Drag and drop that over. It's just simply drag and drop. It's like moving folders and stuff around. There it is. Now it's uploaded. Test.html. So what I can do is I can actually go to, and here's the next part of the, so URL generation. So that is Cyberduck uploading. That's pretty much it. Drag and drop. The key there is to make sure you get it in the right location. You got to be inside the www folder, and if you start putting folders and directories in here, you can, it's not too difficult to miss those, but you got to be careful that you don't drop it into a folder that's already there. So, I mean, maybe I'll create an images folder. So I'll put all my pictures in there. And I just have to be careful then when I'm dragging this over that I don't accidentally drop it there, because now I have it in that folder and that's not what I want. If you do something wrong, you can always right click, you can always go and delete files from your server. Just be very careful when you do that. And don't double click files. If you double click something, it will download it. So if I double click that, now it's downloading it. It's asking me, oh, I want to overwrite it, and I don't even know where it's trying to put it. So just, my advice is just don't. Avoid double clicking files from your Cyberduck window, because all that will do is download them. If, now, my next step is to open this in the browser. I've opened it from, so I've opened it from the desktop. So here it is, my file from the desktop, and you can see the URL represents I'm on the hard drive in my user's desktop full, and then there's the web root and test.html. That's great, but that's not live. That's not live online. Nobody else can see that. So what I want to do is I want to locate this file. This is live online. This is in that www folder. Anyone can see it if they know what the URL is. So the domain is the first part. So I want to go to czandra.jomc-class.org, and then I want to locate, and that gets me to the www folder. That www folder is what this is going into. So then my next step is to locate the file. So say I'm going to go to test. So I do /test.html. Now it loads it. So it looks exactly the same as what I had, which is kind of the point. It is the same file, but now this file is online. Anybody can go. You guys can go. You can put in this URL, and you can see this file that I've created and put up there. Does that make sense? Hopefully I didn't lose anybody. I know I tend to talk a little fast sometimes. So that's URL generation. That's how you figure out the URL. It's basically taking that domain, so your username.jomc-class.org, and everybody's going to have a different username, and that gets you to the www folder. From there, it's a matter of looking at the files and directories in here and saying, okay, say this was in images folder. So my next step would be like, okay, I want to go to test.html. So then I have to go into the images folder first and then test. So that changes my URL over here. So that means I have to come to here and go into my www folder, which is the domain. Then I have to go into the images, and then I have to locate test.html. And again, it pulls up the same file because it just moves. If I remove that and I just go looking for test.html, it's not there anymore because now it's inside this folder. So it's in a directory. That means I have to represent that directory also in the URL. Clear? Anybody need any clarification on any of that stuff? Like I said, I'll post this to Blackboard and YouTube, and you can review it if you want. So next is validation. In validation, we can talk about basically HTML validation and CSS validation are very similar. But I'll talk most about HTML, and then we'll just take a look at CSS, because CSS will be next week. So this week we're just basically dealing with HTML for the assignment. So as far as validating goes, there's a couple ways to do it. There's the website. It's you can just Google validator HTML, and it's this validator.w3.org. It's linked from Blackboard as well. There's several ways to do it. I can validate by URI, which means this is the URI. So I can copy this. I can go here. I can paste this in, and that's the URL that I'm validating the HTML for. And then I click check. And it goes, and this is what I want. This is what I want, this green bar. This is no errors or warnings. That's great, perfect. If, and I'll mess this up just for fun, if, say, I left off the title and I missed a character here. So I'll save that. I'll mess a few other things up, and then I will re-upload. So I will go back to test.html. I will reload it here. So now I have two versions of test. This is my latest, this is my messed up version. So maybe what I'll do is call it test broken. So what I'll do is I will go back to this page, and I will pull that up. Remember, I'm going to the www folder, and I just want to go directly to this, which is right at that root level. So it's just test broken.html. That's the page. It doesn't look any different, but if I copy this URL, I go to the validator, I paste in that, and I go to check. Now I've got problems. So what shows up in red are what I'm concerned about. The yellow warnings, I don't care so much. They're not going to count against your grade. For this particular thing, we're only really concerned with the actual errors. So it's telling me line 6, here it is. It gives me some context. It says what's missing. Head is missing, required instance of child element, title. So that means the title is missing from the head. So line 6 to line 6, columns, whatever, it's just basically saying title is missing, which I deleted. You saw me delete that. Then line 8, where I deleted this bracket right here, it's missing something. It's saying expecting an attribute name, but I should be able to look at this and go, okay, body needs a close bracket. That's missing. And then this is a cascading error from the number 2 error. So div not allowed on element body at this point because div is not allowed here because body doesn't close. That body open tag doesn't close. And then this is another cascading one, which because this div is not allowed, this div is not supposed to be there either. So what I need to do is I basically need to start at the top and go, all right, I'll fix this one, and we'll put the title back in. And then what I might do is I might save it. And the other way to validate, let me really quick run that over. The other way to validate is by file upload. So if I don't want to go through the process of going to Cyberduck, pulling up my file, dragging and dropping it over there, I know I just need to check a couple things, and then I might need to fix some more things, and I don't want to fix it, drag it, upload it, check it, fix it again, drag it up. That process gets a little tedious. So what I can do is I can validate the file from my computer directly before I upload it. And that might be something to do, before you upload it even the first time. So what I can do is I can select this tab, I choose the file, I want test2, that's right, because I didn't rename it broken until after I'd uploaded. So I want test.html, and then I want to check. Now I've fixed the first error, but it's still giving me the error for the body not closing, and then this one because the div's not allowed there, and then this one because this div is extra now that div is not allowed. So then what I can do is I say, okay, well I fixed one error. I can go back to my code. I can say line 9 is where, and it tells you this is where your error occurs. Line 9, somewhere in that line, column 7, which is 1, 2, 3, somewhere in here. I don't know how the column matters that much. I will close that bracket. And you can kind of see too also, when that is missing, this is the wrong color. So this ID should be green, wrapper should be orange. That's another visual clue that something's not quite right. So once I finish that, I close the body open tag. Now these go back to being the correct colors. I can save this. I go back to this, and I can actually go back and just revalidate by file upload. So I can do this again. I grab that HTML file, and I check it. And then it gives me, now that I've gotten green, no errors, then I can go, okay, now I want to re-upload. So I want to go test, drag and drop it again. Normally, if it were, and this is the renamed one, so normally it would ask me to overwrite a file. So if I wanted to do that, I would drag and drop test, and it would come up with this, or over here, this transfers would say, do you want to overwrite test? And I would just say, yes, please overwrite and continue. It would upload, and then it would tell me upload complete. So then what I could do is I could go back to my browser. I could go back to, and I want to validate test.html. And I always recommend, even if you validate something locally before you upload it and it's all valid and it works, I have run into situations where somebody will have a valid file. They may have somehow ended up with two versions of their file. They uploaded the wrong version, and then the version that they uploaded isn't valid. So I always recommend make sure you validate once it's uploaded. So we have test.html here. I can copy that. I can go back to my HTML checker, the validation, validate by URI. I come back in here. I paste in the HTML. And remember, HTTP means it's online. If you see something that says file : that's a local file, and nobody else can see that but you. So I want to paste this in and click check, and it gives me my green bar, says yay, no errors. So questions on that validation stuff? There is another way to do it that using the tool. There's a web developer's toolbar that allows you to validate. I find honestly that this is just about as fast to just use the website. It works great for either local files or files that are already uploaded. The web developer toolbar validation, the validate local file HTML doesn't work actually very well in Chrome. It works in Firefox but not Chrome, which is part of the reason I don't really talk about it a whole lot. It's there. What I can do is I can pull up the page, I can go to it, and I can say validate HTML, and it gives me the same thing as what this did. So how do you make the practice into something for others to see and not the file at the beginning of the URL? You mean this practice HTML one? Is that what you're talking about? Okay, so you have I'm assuming once you've created this, you should have a folder with an HTML file in it. And let me see if I actually have this. Yeah, I have it in here somewhere. It's this one. So here it is. So I've done this one before. What I ended up with is, and this should look something like what you have, or what you have should look something like this, right? Is that pretty close? So you have this. So you have, and it can be in whatever folder, but you have an HTML file that when you open it in a browser looks like this. And then you have a folder for, I'm assuming you have then a folder for images. So all that's required for this to be, like you said, This is a local file, so right here you can tell this is on my hard drive, in my users folder, in all these different folders. I want to put it, and your question is putting this up online, right? That's the question. All right, so to do that, it's the same process as what we just did with the test HTML, but it involves more files. So I will make this fit here. So I will pull up, again, you do basically the same process. You connect your Cyberduck to your web host, you double click into the www folder, and from here it's just a matter of, again, selecting the files that you want to make online and drag and drop. So I'm selecting Dubai.html, I'm selecting images, and it's asking me, because images is a folder that already exists, it's asking me to overwrite. I'll say yes, continue, and then it's going to upload the HTML, it's going to upload the images, and then it's going to tell me complete. Then what I have over here, maybe if it worked, yep. So you may have to hit refresh. But here's my images, the Khalifa Tower, Emirates, Dubai, all those are there. Here's Dubai.html. So now it's just a matter of locate this file. So it's the domain again, so your domain / and I'm just going into the www folder. This is the root folder. This is in the root folder. So it's just a matter of the file name, Dubai.html. And there it is. It's the same file. I mean, it didn't really, nothing changed, but now the URL is an actual web URL. So it's just a matter of, again, making sure that your files, you know where your files are, and you drag them over in basically keeping them in the same relationship to each other. That's important. So the relative relationship between this and these cannot change. If I drag this in here, if I drag the Dubai HTML over there, and then I go into images and I select these and I drag them over there and don't put them in an images folder, that relationship, that relative relationship between the HTML file and the images is, if you look at the HTML file, it's telling them to look in a folder called images for Khalifa Tower. It's looking in images for Burj Al Arab. All these JPEGs are in images. It's referencing that images folder. If I don't include that in this transfer over to the web host, those break down and those images won't show. So I have to make sure that the relative path, the relationship between the HTML and anything that's linked to it, it can be other HTML pages. In this case, it's images. It can be a CSS document, whatever it is that's linked into that HTML via an image source, via, there's a link element that goes in the head to link CSS documents. That relationship has to remain the same between my local side and my server side. When you submit to Blackboard, the question is, when I submit to Blackboard, do you want the actual file or just the URL? When you submit to Blackboard, I want the URL. So this is what you would turn in. If there's some doubt, some question about whether this is correct, I mean, it should be pretty obvious. Is if you copied it from the browser and you're looking at the page and you copy it from the browser, it should be, I mean, that's sort of, hopefully I would call it idiot. I don't want to call anyone idiots, but calling it idiot proof. To say if you're looking at the file and you're looking at the URL and it's not one of these, where was it? I don't have one up here anymore. It's not one of those local file URLs, so it doesn't look like file colon this one. So if it doesn't say this, if it's an actual web URL, that should work just fine. But if there's any doubt, any question, yeah, you could upload the HTML file also. But I would definitely check the URL that you upload first or submit first. The other thing to take a look at here is the CSS validation, and this is just sort of a for next week sort of thing. But since we're talking about validation, I will talk about this as well. Again, you can Google CSS Validator and it'll be the top. There's also cssvalidator.org. They look exactly the same. In fact, I think they use the same engine. The jigsaww3.org is the one I normally use. Same thing. This, you validate the URI, so you have a page that you have. This has no CSS, so it won't give me any results for it. But if it did, let's just do this one. So I'll put mine up there. So I have CSS attached here. I will copy this. I will copy the URL from the page I want to check. I would go to here. I would paste it in. And this is going to give us some errors. I know this isn't valid totally. Oh, never mind. It is error free. Same process. It looks a little different, but you know, if you're getting the green bar, this is no error found. That's great. If you're, I'm trying to find, let's see here. Let's pick on Yahoo. So I'm pretty sure theirs won't validate. So if I go here, I copy that, I paste their URL in, I check it. Yeah, so here we go. So this is what it looks like when you have, oh man. Well, we'll just look at the top. So looking at here, this first column, when CSS Validator finds errors, the first column tells you what line the error is in. So these are all in line 1. This is kind of, how many errors did this have? There's a lot, 522 errors. So line 1 has to do with this particular bit of code, and then this is some context. It says normal is not a hyphens value. So let's find one that actually makes more sense. Zoom property, this one, zoom property doesn't exist. So they tried to use zoom in their CSS, and it's not a property that exists. So basically you would look at the line, it tells you what line it's on, and then try to figure out from there what error it is. This one, parse error. There might be some extra stuff in the code. Looks like there's an extra character in the code here. Anyway, that's so the other way to do it is, you can do the same thing. In this instance, if you were validating CSS, you would not choose the HTML file. Let me see if I have a CSS file I can validate. Yeah, here we go. Nope. Let's do this one. So here's nothing there either. I know I have one somewhere. Where is it? Where would it be? This one has CSS. Here we go. So I find a CSS document. I check it. That also validates. And I always validate all my stuff, so it's hard to find something I have on my computer that isn't valid. But you saw the results of the invalid stuff from the Yahoo page. And that's it for, that's pretty much CSS validation in a nutshell too. You can validate CSS via the toolbar as well. But again, local CSS doesn't work, and so I recommend just using the website, because it's just about as fast and it uses the exact same service. If I validate the CSS on here, there isn't any CSS, so it doesn't find any errors, but it does the exact same thing. That's pretty much all I had on the agenda to talk about this evening. Are there any other questions? There is also an infographic assignment. That's a graphic design assignment. I would recommend, I recommend using Illustrator. for this, the infographic. But oh, something to point out here is there's this vector infographic elements zip file. That is a bunch of source files, and I'll kind of show you what that is. It's pretty cool. Infographic, where is it? There it is. So inside there, if you download and unzip that, there's a bunch of EPS, and these are big file, like long, tall files. This is a cool one. This one's actually in Illustrator. What these are basically just vector shapes and objects and graphic elements that you can use in infographics. They're basically here in case you decide you want a map. So this has, and all of these are vector shapes, so you can literally copy paste from here. So I can copy this whole thing, I can create a new document, I can paste it in there. Now I have a map of the world that I can manipulate. I can drag colors, you know, I can make it pink. I don't know if I can, doesn't look like it's grouped. It's all one shape, I think. You know, I could maybe decide. I wanted something else. But anyway, these are just basically resource files. So you can take a look through them. EPS files you can drag into Illustrator also. And they're also, here's another map. And this one's a little more individual. But like, I may have to copy. So you can copy and paste some of this stuff. Like say I want these icons of, there's a computer icon, there's people icons, there's different icons for different things. These are just basically resources. Here's another Illustrator one. This one also has a map, has different shapes. And like this is something that's, there's actually a 3D engine in Illustrator that you can use. So that's kind of cool. There's some pie graph. But anyway, those are resources that you can take and get ideas from. I mean, a lot of times you can just use them for ideas because there's some pretty cool like ways to illustrate stuff on here. Or you can actually take elements from here to use also. That information on these is not real information. For this assignment, there are 3 sets of data. There's infographics information, there's typography, and there's principles of design. And what you should do for this is use one of these 3 sets of data for your information. You can use these for design ideas, but if you look real close at them, it's all Greek text. It's just lorem ipsum. None of it is actual English. So it's not data that you can actually use. It's just the graphic styles and the elements that you can take and use. So the information needs to come from one of these, and you can choose one of these 3 text files. All right, are there any other questions? If not, that's about all I had. Like I said, I'll edit this down, shorten it up a little bit, and then throw it up on YouTube, and then try to get it yet this evening up there, and then attach that into Blackboard. Probably what I'll just do is put it into this week's tutorials folder. There's a lot in there for this week, I know, but some of them are quite short. There is some stuff already in there. There is a Cyberduck FTP upload already in there. There is these 2 working with Komodo edit. There's something on navigation in HTML which should be very useful. So there's the web developer toolbar, which basically does the function of that HTML validation website. This is pretty cool, the web inspector tools. You want to take a look at this because this is pretty neat. And then this is for the practice. These two are for practice. And then there's just some extra stuff, me dealing more with fonts and oh, these are like graphing and stuff like that for the infographic assignment. All right, well, I think if there aren't any other questions, that's pretty much all I've got to discuss. Everybody good? Perfect. All right. Good luck, everyone. You know how to get a hold of me. Have a good evening.